Hey everyone, Rita McGrath here. You probably knew that. I'm delighted to be here with you on the Thought Sparks podcast. My guest is Sabina Nawaz, author of this terrific new book, You're the Boss. I still have the galleys. I'm very proud of that. But I also was able to give an endorsement to the book. So I am definitely a fan. So Sabina and I met, I want to say, on an airplane somewhere in the middle of the sky over Seattle. And both of us had shared some observations about Microsoft at the time, was right in the middle of the Balmer era. And Sabina had been doing a lot of leadership development coaching. And I had been doing some teaching for them in a course that was known as the Member Bench. And over the course of a long flight, we not only got to know each other, but also got to talk about some of the peculiarities and idiosyncrasies of leading high growth organizations. So Sabina, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rita. It brought back, I remember that conversation just like it was yesterday, and yet so much time has passed since then. And so many things have changed.
So many things have changed, yeah. Microsoft itself isn't the company it was then, which is always very, very interesting. So for those that don't know, you maybe give a little bit of your story and how this book came to be.
Okay. Well, I'm sure, Rita, you've written so many books, and they probably rattle around in your head for a while, don't they? Before they
even right over that shoulder right here.
Yes.
It hasn't gotten into the world yet, but it's there.
That's great. I cannot wait to check it out. I still have your galley for looking around corners. And so this process was about a decade in the making, and essentially started with the fact that I had over 12,000 pages of data from feedback that people provide on what's it like to work for their boss. And whenever I coach somebody, I interview about a dozen people on their team and collect that. So I did some research, some analysis of that to say, what are the things that work best in bosses? What are the things that don't work so well? And how do we deal with that? But there is a personal story as well that leads to the origin of this book. And that's the fact that I was a lousy manager at Microsoft. Now, that wasn't always the case. At first, I ran teams that built software. Most of the people told me I was the best boss they had ever had. I cared about them. I coached them. Those were great years. Then I was running Microsoft's management development. The Member Bench was part of that you were teaching at, Rita. And the first day I was coming back from parental leave, everything changed. Here I was, putting on lipstick for the first time in 5 months. And my assistant, Lori, calls me frantic. Where are you? Steve expects you in 30 minutes. Lori starts to read me the memo that I'm supposed to discuss with Steve Ballmer, the CEO of the company, as I hit warp speed somewhere near the on-ramp. And that set the pace and tone for my return to work. Inbox packed, calendar overflowing, infant at home, no sleep, no peace, no patience. And I morphed overnight from being caring and compassionate and nurturing to snippy and short. Still 5'2" short, but now also short-tempered. Rushing to meet deadlines, I didn't have time to explain things in detail to people, let alone repeat them. I started to micromanage. Whenever somebody came to my office, I would leave all 10 fingers on the keyboard and look over my shoulder, indicating I'm very busy, you're less important than me, spit it out, move on. The worst part of this was I thought I was being efficient until my colleague Joe stops by. And here I am. Yes, Joe. And Joe looks at me and I know, about to give me some bad news. He says, Zach is crying in his office because of what you said. And my entire body goes hot with shame. I can no longer make eye contact with Joe, not because I'm looking at the keyboard, but because I feel so guilty. And I think, how did I get here? How did I go from being caring and nurturing to this? Someone people apparently fear and really don't like. And of course I go and I apologize to Zach, and his eyes brim with tears again. And it is in this moment of connection, Rita, that I realized this is what I want, to treat people with humanity. And I want to help other managers do the same. I have so much compassion for managers who are under pressure. Because in my book, as you know, I say, it is not power that corrupts. It is pressure that corrupts. And pressure is everywhere, and it's constant, and it affects all of us. And under pressure, we raise our voice, we provide harsher criticism than necessary, and then the power isolates us from the effect that pressure-filled action is having on people.
One of the things I love about the book is it's really like a handbook for new managers almost. It really takes you example by example. And I love the title, so you're the boss, become the manager you want to be and others need, which I thought was just a very succinct way of framing that. And the book is just full of amazing stories. Like the one that comes to mind is there was a guy working for a film company, I think you said, who was professionally brilliant, but just personally creepy, bad hygiene and just felt that he was above the rules. And I think that's one of the corrupting effects that power can have. So when managers are feeling pressure, what are some of the things you coach them to start to do? Because a lot of times, I'd say the situations that are genuinely emergency crisis, I've got to do this right now or the world is going to come to an end, those are relatively rare. The more sort of common or garden pressures that I see people putting themselves under are like, oh, it's the end of the quarter, or oh, I've got an emergency business trip to somewhere. It's they're not things that are life and death matters.
They're not. And one of the things you can do immediately under pressure is do nothing. This is often people, I don't know what it's like for you, Rita. What do you do when you're feeling that crush of pressure? What do you tend to do?
Me? It depends what the source is, but very often what I'll try to do is create a space where I don't feel that I don't even know which piece of paper to pick up next. So I'll actually do some physical tidying, books belong there, the papers belong there. I'll put that thing that's bothering me in a folder. So I guess it's what you're suggesting. It's you take a moment to just get your mind off the thing.
Yes, that's beautiful. Clearly, you're in the advanced set here. Most people, when they're under pressure, they hunker down. They sacrifice date night and they sacrifice going to the gym and sleep and well-being because they have to do, go. I've got to, all the sticky notes start to proliferate as opposed to getting sorted and put in their places. And so this practice that I call blank space is particularly helpful when you're under pressure. Mm-hmm. This is 2 hours a week, contiguous, where you do nothing. Do nothing. You are not online. You are not reading. You are not talking to anyone. You are not in your work or your home. So ideally, you're out walking. I have a client who wants to explore every single pie shop in the city of Seattle. So each white blank space time, he goes to a different shop and orders 2 pies. He also works out, so he can afford to do that. And when you have that time to really step back, a couple of things happen. First of all, what you mentioned, Rita, which is it puts things in perspective and you realize the world is not going to come to an end if I don't respond to that email right away or create that memo. In fact, do I even need to do that? So it helps put things in perspective. But the second thing it does too is what research shows, that our best ideas come when we're not so busy doing and thinking, when we're not overthinking. Often we feel pressure because we feel inadequate, we feel like losers, we feel imposter syndrome, we believe that we don't have the answer and we're stuck. And when you allow your brain that resting space, suddenly you realize the answer has been there all along inside you. And it just comes in that flash of insight, just like it does in the shower or on our commutes or during exercise. So doing nothing when you're feeling pressure is one immediate action you can take.
So another thing that you talk about is sort of your chapter's entitled "Becoming the Boss of You," and I thought it was interesting that you make a distinction between people who kind of are owned by their calendars and their inboxes and all this stuff, and people who are more sort of in control of those. Mm-hmm. And are there tips you would offer people to get out of that place of just feeling like every single day is a battle against this flood of incoming material?
Yes. Yes. So two things. One is the tiniest, most ridiculously small thing you can do, which is about a micro habit. And a micro habit is just that. It's micro. It's really, really, really small. And it's habit as in something you do every single day. For most of my clients, we talk about a micro habit when they wake up. Because what do most people do when they wake up? They start immediately with their device, they get on work, and they get sucked in, and everything starts to feel out of control and unravels, and there goes my intention to work out or do whatever else I needed to do. So one micro habit might be how I start my day, and it might be just for the first 10 seconds when I wake up, I'm not going to touch my device. Now, saying you're not going to do something is not quite a habit, so you want to have a substitute. I like to say, this is my micro habit, I like to say I have a daily meditation practice. That daily meditation practice involves one inhale and one exhale for those first 10 seconds when I wake up and don't pick up my phone. That's it. Now, when we do it at that ridiculously small increment, we are more likely to be successful. And when we are successful, we're more likely to do it the next day. Over time, that can become a bigger habit or a macro habit even. For example, last Sunday, I ran my first marathon.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And I was not able to run even a full mile a few years ago. So my micro habit was incrementing my running distance by 0.1 miles, 0.1 miles. And by doing that over time, over the period of 3 years, here I was at 26.2 miles. So micro habits help you gain control back and help you make progress that over time becomes significant. That's one thing you can do to gain control immediately without a huge overlay of time. There is one more thing, Rita, and that is this idea of a time portfolio, which is stepping back and thinking about your time, which we claim is our most precious resource, not that we always manage it that way. Think of it as a portfolio. What are the big chunks where you invest your time? So as a manager, it might be managing your team, doing their performance assessments, one-on-one staff meetings. It might be whatever you need to do for your manager, attending their staff meetings, etc. Maybe you spend a lot of time with the external world, dealing with customers. Maybe you spend time in project reviews. And then, of course, you have a chunk of time on email and other forms of communication. So you write down the approximate percentage allocation in each of these buckets today. Then you write down where you want to be down the road, say 12 to 18 months down the road. And let's say you're spending 35% of your time on email and communication, and you want that to go down to 20%. Mistake number one would be to try and do that overnight. That, of course, doesn't work. So you've got the 35% today, you've got the 20% 18 months from now. Now you create an intermediate step. And you've guessed it, it would be in those micro increments. So you might say, I'm going to go from 35% to 33%, and my action is to turn off all notifications. So I'm less distracted by that. I'm less likely to get sucked back into email. So the time portfolio is outlined in more detail, and there's a downloadable form on my website if you want to create your own time portfolio.
Oh, I'm sure that will be a very useful tool for people. I think a lot of times we're so reactive, and I do think, one of the things you talk about in the book a lot is that, going from being a good individual contributor to now having to be a leader or a boss or a manager, whatever you call those people, it's a change in phase of the job. What you had known how to do very well no longer really applies. And I think that's a hard recognition for some folks. And I've noticed in the companies I work with, a lot of times people will still be doing, their previous job. I remember I did an exercise, which is another useful one, good compliment to the ones you did. I surveyed the members of this team that was really dysfunctional. They were missing deadlines. They didn't feel accountable to each other. There was no trust. It was just a sort of, I'm sure you run into this all the time, just they were a mess. And the first diagnostic thing that I did with them was I said, okay, we're going to put everybody's name down one side of a sheet of paper, and we're going to put this person should spend 1 hour more doing per week and 1 hour less doing per week, on the theory that I can't change your whole life, but I could maybe change how you use an hour.
1 hour a week.
And then we confidentially collected all the feedback. And what was super interesting was that the woman who'd been promoted to be their CFO hadn't given up her old job, basically. And so all the comments were about less micromanaging, more collaboration, more partnership, more providing us with guidance, more stepping up to that leadership role. And as you say in the book, until you have some kind of feedback, it's really easy to remain unaware of, of some of those dynamics. So how do you take someone who's well-intentioned but clueless, and you've got a fabulous number of examples in the book. And where do you start with them? How do you start into that state of greater self-awareness?
Right. That's the majority of my clients. Most people don't wake up in the morning going, I want to create chaos and mayhem and act like a jerk. They wake up with...
I know a few that do, but...
There might be one or two, but not very many. And so they wake up with good intentions. Look, nobody wants to struggle. Bosses want to do a good job managing. Employees want to contribute and grow. They both want to feel connected and in sync with each other. So what do we do? And this is so common. I have a name for them, the innocent saboteurs, who not only wake up with good intentions, they often think that the thing they're doing is actually helping, not hurting. Just like when I was looking over my shoulder of the keyboard, I was thinking, I'm just being super efficient. Look at me. Woohoo. Mm-hmm. And so how do you draw their attention to this? Well, at the very end of the book is a section called 360 Yourself, which is basically giving yourself feedback from 42 different questions. Because here's the challenge. When you're a manager and the more senior you get, the less truth you're going to get. The more you act out, the more people feel miserable around you, even less truth you're going to get. So how do you get real data on what's going on and what's the impact of your actions, of your unintended actions? So you could answer those 42 questions. Now, you might go, well, Sabina, I have so much pressure in my life. I don't have 10, 15 minutes to answer 42 questions. Here's a couple to get you started. First of all, are you the only one who brings up ideas in meetings? Meetings where you're the most senior person around. Second, does anybody ever disagree with you? Third, are you the one who's working the hardest to come up with ideas, to populate the agenda for the staff meeting, to make sure everybody's there on time, and so on and so forth? These are a few clues that you might be in dangerous territory. And that's when you might want to pull out all those questions and see where they are. Another thing you can do is ask for feedback, but design your questions in a way that bypass some of the barriers that are put in place with that power gap. Here are two things you can do to get that feedback in slightly more truthful manner. The quality of the question you ask is directly proportional to the quality of feedback you're going to get. So if you just say, how did I do? Of course, the answer is going to be, you did great, boss. So if you're looking for a pat on the back, ask a yes, no, closed-ended question. But if you really want feedback, make it simple and small. So what's one thing I did that worked well in that meeting? What's one thing, if I did more of or less of, would help that go even better? So now you're not overwhelming them. You might be getting this sense, Rita, I'm very much a minimalist. You're not overwhelming them with, give me feedback about everything. One thing. And then make it third person. So if that's too confrontational for them, just say, if my biggest fan were in the room, what's one thing they would have said? And if my biggest critic were in the room, what's one thing they would have said? So this helps the employee feel less pressure with their necks craning up to give you the truth.
I love that. And you do spend a lot of time in the book on the dangers of power. So the twin sort of themes are pressure, but then combine that with power, and you can get this sort of toxic mix.
Absolutely.
So what are some aspects of power that trip people up that they may not be?
Well, one of them, and this works both ways. So see, power is like this broken volume knob. Everything that employees say upward is muted, milder than what they're experiencing, and cushioned in praise.
Yeah.
So when an employee says, yes, boss, everything is fine, what they really mean is, I've started a secret group chat to talk about your management habits or your hygiene. It's like that cry, right? And at the same time, everything a manager is saying is amplified.
Yes.
It's more urgent, it's more dire, and it's gunning straight at us. So as a manager, when we say, hey, can we chat? To the employee, it sounds like, I hope you said goodbye to your office plants. So this divide causes a lot of missed communication, because here you have a manager who's unaware of her impact and an employee who's unwilling to speak up. One of the things that works both ways, what I call a power gap, is the danger of the singular story. The more experienced we are, the more we're used to being right, the more quickly we jump to conclusions, make assumptions, and act on those, which is great most of the time, but some of the time it's incomplete, outdated, incorrect. And nobody is going to dare to tell you that. So how can you make multiple meanings, multiple interpretations of what might be going on before you act? This does not mean spending hours in analysis paralysis. I work with organizations across the globe, and we take the hairiest business challenges, and in 9 minutes, through a process we follow, they can leave with 15 different interpretations, and therefore perhaps a smarter and a different way to tackle the issue. Similarly, when you're managing up, this power gap that opens up is because we love to make up stories about what the person in the position of power is thinking, and specifically what they're thinking about us. So that takes up a lot of time. Like, imagine you have your boss, you see your boss, Jerry, waiting by the elevator when you get to work. Any weekend plans, Jerry, you ask with a smile. And Jerry just sips his venti Americano with that stone face you see on many executives. And so, attempting to move the stone, you say, I'm going to see the new Marvel movie. Jerry squints at you, shrugs, gets in the elevator, stone face. And now you think, he definitely heard me that time. What an ass. Is this because of that email I didn't respond to? And you came into work in a good mood that morning. Now you're going to spend the rest of the day plotting against Jerry. In fact, what's wrong with him? I quit. I cannot take this anymore. One stone-faced elevator ride, and now we're ready to quit. We've written an entire resignation letter in our heads. This happens a lot. Now, the fact is, Jerry wasn't judging you for your entertainment preferences. He saw the movie and liked it. He's not seething about that email either. He's just not a morning person. He's not sentient until his second cup of coffee. But as employees on the low end of the power gap, we constantly misinterpret body language. And if we'd known about Jerry's crippling dependence on caffeine, we would have given him space. We would have correctly interpreted that his silence was because of grogginess, not because of hostility. At least not hostility directed at us. He could have been mad at the sun for rising. So here's again an opportunity to practice multiple meanings. Instead of, look, we as human beings, we're meaning-making machines. We're storytelling machines. So it's fruitless to say, oh, assume positive intent. Don't make up stories. Don't jump to conclusions. That's like saying, don't obey gravity. I tell people, do make up stories. Do jump to conclusions, but hold them lightly. And do not act until you've made up even more stories. Do not act until you have at least 3 stories. So if one story is Jerry hates me because of that email I didn't send, another story could be maybe Jerry's not a morning person. And a third story could be Jerry got some bad news from his boss today. Now I might show up with more empathy and certainly not get as triggered myself and compose that resignation letter once I know that there's more than one way to see the situation.
Absolutely. One of the things that is actually a very practical use of AI these days is to generate alternative stories.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Humans aren't great at it. You know, these old creativity tests where they give you a mop or something and you say, come up with as many possible uses for the mop. And people talk about using it as a riding horse or using it as a mop or using it as a wig, you know. But we pretty quickly as human beings kind of run out of ideas. Whereas an AI could come up with 5,000 ideas, and most of them will be really stupid, but they'll come up with divergent ideas to what we had when we came into the room. And I think that's super interesting.
That is, I mean, and it's so relevant to what you do, Rita, around businesses and businesses remaining relevant and thriving around those corners.
Mm-hmm.
If you just stick with that singular story, not just from a people perspective, but even from a business perspective, you're hosed.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would actually argue is really different about strategy today than it was when I started in the field more years ago than I care to admit. Strategy used to be about point forecast. We have our 4-word slogan. We have our point forecast. We got our 5-year plan. We've got our beautiful decks. We probably got a hefty bill from some consulting firm, and off we go. And today, what I'm seeing is much more clarity around purpose and mission. I think that's universal. I mean, we know that human beings don't do very well when they don't feel what they're doing has meaning. When they feel it's just, not really core to something important. They want to matter, right? You want to matter. You want to be doing something significant. But around that, right, what we're having to do now is construct multiple scenarios and think about, these things could go in a number of different forking directions, and the right move for our company is going to be different depending on which fork it goes in. So consistency around mission and a lot of flexibility around how we're going to deliver to that mission. And that's the need for that is really amped up. And that's where I think a lot of what you talk about in the book is so important, because if you have a change of strategic direction that's been made necessary because of something that's beyond your control, so we had a tariff thing go on, or there's a port that's closed, or there's been a supply chain hiccup, or there's a new regulation passed which makes our business difficult. If any of those external shocks hit your company, you have to be able to bring people with you. And so a lot of the techniques in the book are ways of kind of practicing doing that, ideally before you need to.
Yes, it's about building that muscle. If you get into the habit of thinking in divergent ways, in multiple different ways, and involving other people to do that with you, especially when you're in a position of power, then when you're in a crisis, people will naturally start to gravitate toward that kind of mindset, as opposed to let's stick with one thing and jump in and do it.
Right. Right. But people have to be brought along, because otherwise they're going to say, Joe went to another meeting and came back with this other laundry list of things that we've got to do. I used to joke in class that people I used to tease them with my participants, and I would say, even as you're sitting here, there are people back home dreading the fact that you're going to come back from this course.
Exactly. I do the exact same thing. Yes. Oh no. What new framework and tool are they going to foist on us?
Exactly.
Yes.
So I'd love to learn more about building trust, because what we see just in the whole sort of landscape of work is kind of depressing, right? I mean, something like 70% or more of employees don't report high levels of engagement. The Edelman Trust Barometer just came out, and we're losing trust in all these institutions. Business is actually doing surprisingly well, given everything. But it seems to me that the core of building these effective teams that you talk about really is to get people to build these trusting relationships. And how might you coach people to do that?
There are 7 what I call communication fault lines in a chapter in the book, and communication is the biggest chapter because it's so key. So much of trust starts with how we communicate or don't communicate. One of the big ones is around a fault line I call assuming cluelessness, where we think we have the answer. Let's say I have an employee who's struggling with their performance, or at least their results are not showing up how I want them to, and I assume that they don't know anything about this. I'm going to just go vomit out feedback and give them some advice. And this, of course, for many managers causes them to lose sleep before doing that, because who loves confrontation and having those difficult conversations? Now, what if instead of assuming cluelessness on the part of your employee, you actually start with them? You say, hey, how do you think you're doing in this project? What's working well on your side? Where do you think there are issues? You'll be surprised that in a large number of cases, they are more aware than you have given them credit for, And by you starting with them, they appreciate that instead of being scolded, being talked down to, being talked at, it becomes a two-way dialogue.
Mm.
There are cases where the Dunning-Kruger effect comes into play, which is that the people at the low end of performance think they're at the high end of performance. So that can happen. And in those cases, though, it is still a fantastic opportunity to have a conversation about alignment. Okay, sounds like you think things are going great. I have a different perspective. I'm so glad we're talking, because let's share both perceptions. And by the way, perception is reality. So this is something that needs to be addressed, but maybe it's just a perception that needs to be addressed. Let's discuss. So treating people on an equal footing immediately increases trust, as opposed to being policed, talked down to, and so on, especially in the era of layoffs and so many other pressures and threats that are coming at us. Another tool that can be useful is a tool of mapping. Mapping basically is explaining in plain English how to understand me and asking your colleagues to do the same. So for example, you could pick physical characteristics. You might see a deep furrow over here on above this eyebrow, because I have a rather severe thinking face. So my map might include that frowning is my thinking face. I'm not mad at you. I'm not mad at the sun for rising like Jerry. I'm just thinking. And that means it's actually a good thing. You gave me something that really got me thinking. You might choose some time of day kind of things to put in your map. So if you were Jerry, you might say, I'm not a morning person. Don't schedule meetings before 10 a.m. You could share communication preferences. I'm more introverted. I like time to process. So send me a pre-read if you want me to have some interaction and ideas in the meeting. So creating a map and having other people create their map helps break down some of those singular stories we make up about each other that lead to mistrust, miscommunication, misunderstanding. I have to share an example of a team where we did this as a leadership team. Now, these people, Rita, knew each other for 10 years. And this one person had a bit of a reputation as being standoffish, aloof. Some people would even say arrogant. He revealed for the first time after working with them for 10 years that he had a condition where he could not recognize people's faces, including his own spouse, every day. So he wasn't being standoffish when he saw them in the hallway. He didn't know who they were. So he could go around like a dummy smiling, or he could just sort of not know who they are. And then once he got to know them, engage with them. But people went 10 years thinking this guy's the biggest jerk ever. And here he was suffering from this very significant condition.
Yeah, and you never know what's going on, behind. The other thing I think that's important to remember is, and I think you alluded to this a little earlier, is we think people spend a lot more time thinking about us than they actually do.
Yes.
Yes. And that can create all kinds of problems because, a glancing remark, a careless thing, a small gesture, and it can have a big ricochet effect, even if you didn't intend it, because you assumed this person had specifically you in mind for this thing. It reminds me of Don Hambrecht, who used to talk about executive symbolism. And I thought he made a great point, and you really sort of dwell on this as well, which is anytime you're in one of these boss kind of roles, there's always the substance of what you're doing, which is what you intended to happen in your conscious mind. And then there's the symbolism, right?
Yes.
You smile at, you sit next to, who did you invite on the business trip? And unless you're really paying attention, these things can take on all kinds of crazy attributions. And I think a lot of leaders are not very aware of the poverty of their symbolism.
Absolutely. Poverty of the symbolism, and or actually abundant symbolism, but so well-intentioned and poorly received.
Yeah.
I also,
best leaders are really, really good at symbolism. I mean, if you think of
Very.
in a speech, the line that you remember, in a meeting, the moment of sort of clarity, they're really good at using symbolism to reinforce their points. And I don't think we talk enough about that. We have to say we're all these rational robots, and we're totally not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're constantly watching for every micro expression, everything that's happening on the boss's face, on the face of the person with the highest power. I often tell my clients, rearrange your face before you walk in the room or the online call, to match, to have fidelity with the message that you really want to land.
Oh, interesting. Another thing I would observe is that a lot of people in these leadership roles just kind of rush from thing to thing to thing, and they don't take even 5 minutes to stop and say, okay, I've got an hour-long meeting. What does good look like? What do I want to accomplish? Why am I taking people's time?
Yes.
And over time, a lot of those kinds of meetings just get to be, let's go through the checklist one more time, and they're not really producing, substantial results. So I'm wondering if do you coach people around how they use meetings, what they use meetings for?
Absolutely. Absolutely. First of all, if you're just there to share information, that's not a meeting. Don't do it. And the biggest thing, though, is how you frame the meeting. And there are 5 steps to framing a meeting. Context. When we last met, we talked about branding and we wanted to do X, Y, and Z. Goal for this meeting. In this meeting, we want to land take the branding conversation further and get agreement on the general direction we're going. Outcome. So that's a pretty broad goal. What are the specific exit criteria for this meeting? We want agreement on the color scheme or whatever it is that you want for the outcome. Number 4, what do you want from them? Do you want them to be a brainstorming partner, to give you feedback, to play devil's advocate, to come up with a decision, to give you resources? What is it that you want from them? Putting people in the hot seat or inviting them to participate in a very specific way is one of the best ways to keep them from multitasking in the meeting.
Okay.
And the number 5 is there anything else you would like to add? You may or may not get to it, but you can put it on a parking lot, but that way they're not distracted the whole time saying, I want to get to that other piece in this meeting.
Love it.
People who have done this and followed this technique have reduced their meeting times, sometimes by as much as 50%. Because the meetings suddenly become more focused. Also, their admins don't allow meetings on the calendar unless these items are there, called out ahead of time.
Oh, very good. That's a great discipline. I mean,
Yes.
I've seen so many people, and I think technology is partly to blame for this. So I know myself, this probably happens to you. People send me meeting invitations all the time. They don't know I'm available. I don't know what the topic is. I don't know why why do I specifically need to be there? And so it's frustrating. And then you have to go back and say, well, what is this actually all about? And it just creates more work for everybody.
Exactly.
More coordination work. So when someone comes to you and says, I think I need help. I think I need to get to the bottom of this. I don't think I'm as effective as I could be. What are some ways in which you start to work with them?
Often, everybody's different. And then, of course, there are some common themes because nobody's that special. So often, one of the first places we start is getting them to shut up. Here's what I mean by that. Again, when power walks into the room, and I'm coaching CEOs, C-suite executives, so a lot of power. When power walks into the room shifts. People are no longer willing to tell you the full truth. Your jokes are now funny enough to land you on America's Got Talent. Your ideas are worthy of a TED Talk every time, right? Because people want things from those in power that they don't want to lose. A raise, a promotion, their very jobs. Mm-hmm. So the minute you start speaking, nobody else is going to contribute. What if you are the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th person to speak? That would be one. So it's not fully shut up, but do that. And by the way, when you stop speaking, your other senses now start to get engaged when your mouth is shut. So you can start to notice more about the dynamics in the room. Who speaks? Who doesn't speak? Who speaks always when this person speaks? What is that look that people exchanged? When did someone go off camera versus on camera? You can start to gather a lot more intelligence. You can get a lot smarter and get to the heart of issues when you stop speaking. So exercising your shut up muscle is one of the things we start with, so we can start to run some diagnostics about what's really going on here. Why are you struggling? Well, you've got to stop speaking to be able to start noticing that.
That's great advice. David Cody, who had a very successful run as the CEO of Honeywell, used to build on that. And he would say a couple of phrases I thought were just wonderful, for the ages. He would say, I don't need to be the smartest person in the room when I walk into the meeting, but we need to have the best decision that we could reach in the meeting, by the end of the meeting. Right? I thought that was great. And then the other thing he would do, and it really shook the company up when he first started. So his background was he came over from GE. I guess there was some sort of power struggle at General Electric, and he landed at Honeywell. And so very hierarchical, both of them were hierarchical organizations. But what he would do is he would always start the conversation by asking the youngest person in the room what they thought. And of course, initially they were all like looking at their bosses. What do I say?
And the headlights. Yes.
But what Cody said was wonderful. He said, look, we're all of a certain generation. We have a certain set of lenses that we look at things through. I really want to know what you think. And it ended up becoming a very productive and useful practice.
That's a great idea. And one of the other things you're bringing up, Rita, is make it consistent. Don't do a practice for one meeting or two meetings and then chase the next shiny practice. So sounds like he did this over and over again, because initially people will be skeptical and they'll be suspicious, because remember, it's all about me and it's dire. So what are they trying to do and how's it going to get me? What's the gotcha here? But if you do it year over year, it becomes a consistent practice. I have a client who does at every staff meeting at the end, what's the 10% you're not saying? And everybody goes around and shares that. And of course, they never get to the bottom of the 10%, nor should they. But by doing it year after year, they know he's serious. He really wants that input.
Yeah, what am I not hearing? Another practice that I love is one that my friend Sharon Price John, who's the CEO of Build-A-Bear Workshop, and what she'll do is she has what she calls it SDSS times 2. And so when she first comes in, it's SDSS, which is stop doing stupid stuff. Giving people permission to, everybody knows what stupidity goes on in your organization. I mean, there's no large organization that doesn't have at least some stupid stuff going on.
Right.
So in her position, and I thought this was insightful, is until you get people to stop doing the stupid stuff, it's very hard to get them to start doing the smart stuff, which is the second SD type.
Start doing smart stuff. Yeah.
Which I just thought
beautiful.
Cool. I thought that was really,
beautiful.
And of course they're at Build-A-Bear, so everything's fun, right? So like, was that a stupid thing you just did? Blah blah blah. I mean, it doesn't have to be unpleasant. And I think that's another kind of myth that that a lot of these kinds of changes are, it's like, I've got to go to therapy. I've got to, turn myself inside out. I've got to meditate and practice self-awareness. And none of those things are bad, but it doesn't, for some people, that's a real barrier to getting the help that they need.
Exactly. This is not about getting a personality transplant. This is not about studying emotional intelligence for years. You should do though. You should study emotional intelligence and practice that. This is about taking a framework and a tool and applying it right away. Just like Sharon did with the SDSS. Yeah. Straightforward, simple. Everybody understands it. It's not mired in corporate jargon or huge change management initiatives.
Oh, that's such a mistake I find when people make. And there's two schools of thought on this, right? So you got the first 90-day people who say, if you don't get all the changes that you want in right away, all these forces of opposition will emerge to oppose you. And then there's the school that I think I tend to fall into more, which is, yes, big change, clarity in terms of the big goal. But usually it's a mistake to try to get there in one leap. Usually it's a series of smaller steps you need to take to get there.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. So have you been involved in a lot of kind of cultural transformations?
Depends on how you define involved. I think that just about every organization is going through a cultural transformation, given the uncertainties in the world, given the technology and the exponential speed of AI, I think even people working on AI are getting surprised at the pace of AI transformation and change. So absolutely, yes, involved in many different ways around more dimensions of cultural change than we have seen in the past.
Mm. Mhm. Well, and I think, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this. We're making this huge transition, right, from a world of mass production, automobiles, and dependence on petroleum, and highways, and suburbs, and that way of life that has served us pretty much every person alive on Earth who's been in the more advanced economies. That's the life they know. That's the only one they grew up with, and we're sort of hurtling towards this world which is dematerializing, in which the value you create may not have anything to do with the manufactured product. It may be a service. It might be something artistic, whatever. And we're just in the middle of this massive transition, and everybody seems to be trying to sort of figure it out. But what I love about your work is, okay, let's acknowledge that. That's the uncertainty. Tomorrow may not be like today, but here are some things I can do as someone who's leading you or working with you or bringing you along, that are consistent no matter what changes in the external environment. And I think that's
yes, and it's about consistency in the face of inconsistency. So what does that really mean? And that means, you had talked about doing the work, but like as a manager, your job is to create the container, not the content. Mm-hmm. And we don't know what content is going to come in with every morning's news. But what's the container? Container might be a consistent practice. For example, what's the 10% you're not saying? We're going to always start to reveal things that concern us, that are in the back of our heads, that we might be holding back for whatever reason. We're going to spit those out. That helps us deal with uncertainty and unpredictability. We might have a certain way we start every meeting in a ritualized fashion. Maybe one word that captures my frame of mind right now, so I can connect with everybody and acknowledge them as human beings. And I love it when we also then at the end of the meeting go, okay, now one word that captures your frame of mind. And sometimes people say hungry because it's butting up on a mealtime, but it's often fun to see the shift in mindset, positive or negative, over the course of the meeting.
Yeah.
But these are rituals. These are things that we can do to ground us and help us deal with these centrifugal forces of change that are really putting us through the ringer.
They are. Well, I'm interested in your notion about unintentional, innocent saboteurs. I think that's a great phrase. And when you sort of look at the workplace right now, it's not very pretty. I mean, a lot of people don't feel inspired. They don't feel they belong at work. We've had this whole backlash against which I don't understand, against the simple principle that people should have access to opportunity. That we should try to help people have pretty equal access to what makes things worthwhile, to the rewards, to the growth, to the development. Where do you think this is all kind of going? Do you think we're going to maybe people will buy your book, which, by the way, audience, is USA bestseller, USA Today bestseller. So the book is called You're the Boss, Become the Manager You Want to Be and Others Need, by my friend Sabina Nawaz. And I guess one manager at a time, one leader at a time. Is that how we're going to dig our way out of this?
Well, the Wall Street Journal had an interesting piece around where CEOs right now are just basically going, suck it up, buttercup. Because the job market is filled. We're now moving towards a world where we're going to put more money towards computing power as opposed to headcount, human headcount. We're going to be managing agents and human beings. So gone all of that empathy and all the stuff at COVID where we were rolling out the red carpet for employees, yoga classes, wellness lessons, flexible work. Now it's like, get your behind into work and suck it up. So we've swung the pendulum from one side to the other, and we tend to do that a lot. Neither one of those is the right answer. We cannot coddle employees on the one hand if we overdo that. We cannot censure them and have them act out of fear. Because, research shows, Bob Sutton's research, for example, that when managers treat employees poorly, they even deliberately make mistakes.
Yes.
So what we're looking for really is a third way where we can have the love and the empathy and the accountability and ownership. And I believe that that comes from shifting a little bit from positional to people. That is, instead of me from the mountain saying, thou shalt come to work like this, and thou shalt do this and shalt not do that, and I'm going to slap you on the wrist for this other thing, or I'm going to give you a rose petal for this thing. What if we worked with employees, particularly the younger generation, because that's who's going to be running the world down the road? What if we worked with them to come up with some answers? I'm not saying this is a Wild West. Within reason. So you might provide some guardrails. You might say, we are going to have people working from the office 3 days a week. And I want to get everybody's ideas on how we do that the best way. And that also reduces the amount of pressure we are under once everybody else starts to contribute to ideas. And guess what? Now it's their ideas. They're more motivated to do those things, because you're right. The workplace is a very difficult place right now. With rolling layoffs, people are waiting for the other shoe to drop. It impacts not just the people who are let go of, it significantly impacts the people who are left behind. Mm-hmm. How much actual work is being done? What are we going to do to re-engage them in that?
Right. Well, I was taken by something you said a minute ago, which is, and I think you're right about this. I think we're going from workplaces that were designed, as I said, for the mass production environment.
Yes.
And they were designed, hierarchically with bureaucracy.
Yes.
And what people forget is that bureaucracy was actually a brilliant invention. It replaced what came before, which were organizations that never got bigger than about 50 people, except for maybe trading organizations that had longer reaches. But before you had bureaucracy, you had individuals just making up their mind. You had basically, dictator-like bosses who, told the people in the factory what to do, or told the people on the farm what to do. So for the first time, bureaucracy introduced, separation of functions and the rise of meritocracy and the ability to say, okay, there's different parts of the company where we can divide labor. And we all know from Adam Smith that creates greater productivity and la, 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 la. So it was a good thing, right? But now what I think we're finding is that we're getting to the end of what that system of organizing for us. And what I'm seeing more and more are units of value creation being small teams or even individuals. So there's talk now about $1 billion solopreneurs, where one person with AI could create $1 billion worth of value. I mean, maybe that's a little hyperbolic, but you hear conversations.
But we're moving in that direction for sure.
I think so. And so I think what's starting to happen now is you're starting to see ecosystems more and more. And in an ecosystem, if you're in a position of influence or leadership, the kind of people that are being described in your book, things just get much more complicated, because it's not a case of, I'm the boss, I'll tell you what to do, go pick up that bucket and bring it back and forth. It's a whole different conversation. And you're dealing with a lot more lateral sources of power, which is also
very much lateral. Very much lateral, and you better know how to deal with that. And it's really difficult because you don't have the formal authority, the formal hierarchy to enforce that. Mm-hmm. That is true leadership. Mm-hmm. Because you could argue that leadership with authority is not really leadership. I've already been given the authority. I have the power to make your life miserable, or to take away your pay, or give you more. But how do you work with people when you don't have that authority?
Well, you got to influence them. Yes. Mm-hmm. I think your book is just full of really great tips and tricks. And what I like is, you got a lovely kind of balance between the things that are longer term and, okay, over 5 years, here's how you're going to change your life. But also in the next 5 minutes, here's a thing you could do, which I think is really charming.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of micro habits that you can start right now with less than 20 seconds.
That's amazing. So what's next for you? What's on the agenda?
That's a great question, Rita. I'm still heavy in the process of getting the book out to the world, as having wonderful conversations like this, and then really speaking on big stages about these combined forces of pressure and power, which I think are so important right now, the two dimensions that are really, really at play in just about every manager's life.
Yeah.
Some people have asked me, when's your next book coming out? And I am at that stage where I'm not ready to even think about the next book. Given this was my first attempt, I am still learning just how much work it is, not just to write the book. Actually, I found it was less work to write the book than everything that comes afterward.
Mm-hmm.
It's really fun, and it's full on. So I'm still fully immersed in this work at the moment.
Nice. Well, we're glad to be able to be a little bit of extra wind in your sails.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, how can people learn more? Do you have a website? You said you have portable tools and things?
Absolutely, yes. So if you order the book and go to sabinanawaz.com, you'll be able to download some bonus material. There's even a book discussion set of questions. If you're doing a book club with it, there's a workshop in a kit. So you can run a workshop for your team using pressure and power. And I've given you all of that on the website. Of course, the book is available wherever books are sold.
Well, very, very nice. Well, I do appreciate you carving out a chunk of time to chat and to reconnect. And who knows, maybe we'll find an opportunity to do something together.
I would so love that, Rita. I learn from you every time we talk. I'm super excited to continue our dialogue. And I'm already noodling about this historical piece that you've drawn out, Rita, of the old organizations, bureaucracy. Now we're going to go back to something that looks and smells like those old organizations. But boy, would it be a mistake if we did it in that authoritarian fashion now. So what does it look like to lead in new organizations that are smaller, pre-bureaucracy era? I'd love to talk to you more about that.
Yeah, well, this is a permissionless theme that I've been working on. I may have mentioned it to you. So Ram Charan and I wrote an article a couple of years ago now about, the permissionless corporation. And the thesis of that article was a fairly limited one, which is it basically said, look, if you look at what managers historically did, proverbially running around with a clipboard, allocating work and planning things and creating budgets and whatever it was managers did, that technology could actually take a lot of that activity and do it better and do it more transparently and do it more quickly. And that there were some organizations that have already started to work this way. So we talk about Amazon to an extent, not the warehouse people, but the people sort of at headquarters. Salesforce. There's a company out in California that makes tomatoes, that cans and processes tomato, that's trying to work that way. So there's little mini examples of where people are using technology to essentially either self-manage or push decision rights as close to the edges of the organization. But that's into a much bigger idea, which is why I'm struggling with the book, which is that we are actually in a highly predictable period in between two capitalist systems, and that when the fundamental possibilities in capitalism change, there's this very predictable pattern that Carlota Perez talks about. She's a Venezuelan economist. And she says, well, first, the older technologies run out of their ability to deliver productivity improvements. And so capital is looking for the next big thing. Then it rushes into the next big thing. That creates a bubble, which is kind of where we are right now. Then the bubble bursts. And now capital has to come out of the bubble. And it's got to go to what she calls the production economy. So we have to figure out what the organizational forms are. And if you think about everything about the world we've grown up in, from how contract law is done, what does generally accepted accounting practice mean? What does it mean when we have these portfolio careers? So what if I work for 3 different employers? What if I'm not even an employee? So how do we handle things like unemployment insurance and income instability and healthcare, and these really big questions about how we organize ourselves to be productive in that future.
Wow,
so there's a lot to unpack there, right?
Yeah, I can see why you've got this going on with your book.
I know. Every week there's some new thing to kind of incorporate. But I think I'll settle on a theme. And then once I think I've settled on the theme, I think the work becomes much easier.
For sure.
So, well, anyway, lovely to chat to you. I hope to be continued, I hope, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, Rita. This was really great.
Thanks.